After being chosen as a Wallfacer, Taylor publicly announced his plan to counter the Trisolarans using humanity's most powerful new conceptual weapon, ball lightning. He planned to organize a special strike force dedicated to using this weapon. To this end, his first step was to visit the discoverer of ball lightning, Ding Yi. At the time, Ding Yi was at an Air Force base, having just disembarked from a spaceplane. Since the beginning of the Crisis Era, Ding Yi had been trying to bypass the Sophon's interference with particle accelerators to resume his physics research. His approach was to deploy a vast array of detectors in space, using cosmic rays to conduct collision experiments in place of accelerators. In effect, this plan was equivalent to building a multitude of cheap accelerators in a race against the Sophons. However, the results of all his experiments remained chaotic. Ding Yi concluded that more Sophons must have arrived in the solar system, making it impossible to escape their interference even with hundreds of accelerators. Taylor hoped that Ding Yi would assist him with his research into ball lightning weaponry. Ding Yi was not optimistic about the idea. He argued that the Trisolarans' grasp of fundamental theory was far more advanced than humanity's, and they would therefore have a much deeper understanding of ball lightning. Using it against them, he said, would be like showing off a trick in front of the masters. Ultimately, Ding Yi stated that the application technology for ball lightning was already quite mature and that Taylor could proceed with the plan without him. For this reason, he declined Taylor's invitation. According to Taylor, the ball lightning weapon required a close-range attack, which meant the assault team would inevitably suffer heavy casualties. Therefore, Taylor decided he needed to build a force with a spirit of sacrifice. He first went to the Japan Self-Defense Forces to investigate, as historically, the Japanese kamikaze special attack units had been very impressive. He hoped to begin forming his assault team there. In Japan, he met with Inoue Hirochi, the Director General of the Japan Defense Agency. Inoue was very displeased with Taylor's idea, arguing that the actions of the kamikaze pilots had not turned the tide of the war and were merely a pointless sacrifice. Furthermore, he believed that sending soldiers on suicide attacks violated the values of modern human society. Next, Taylor came to inspect the Chinese military, where he met with Zhang Behai. He wanted to understand how through ideological and political work, a modern army could be made to regain the spirit of ancient armies and be willing to make self-sacrifices. Zhang Behai, however, argued that the spirit of sacrifice in ancient armies was a product of its time. He believed that unless human civilization reverted to a backward state, this spirit could never be recovered. Humanity must always move forward and should not turn the clock back, causing society to regress. Finally, with nowhere else to turn, Taylor sought out his old adversary, bin Laden. Al-Qaeda also frequently engaged in suicide activities, so perhaps its members could form the assault team. Bin Laden stated that this idea was also unworkable. The reason Al-Qaeda launched suicide attacks, he explained, was entirely due to their intense hatred for Americans. Now that the Trisolarans had invaded, the Americans would be wiped out sooner or later, making Al-Qaeda's hatred for them meaningless. He added that although the Trisolaran invasion would also eliminate the Arab people, they wouldn't hate the Trisolarans for it since the aliens were also getting rid of the Americans. Therefore, Al-Qaeda lacked the ideological foundation to carry out suicide attacks against the Trisolarans.
Hines is a former president of the European Union, and like his wife Keiko Yamasugi, was also a brain scientist. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for his discovery that human thought operates above the quantum level. After becoming a Wallfacer, Hines initially appeared to be under immense pressure and without a clue.
Finally, one night, he revealed his plan to his wife: to use brain science technology to unlock the potential of the human brain, enhancing humanity's intelligence and cognitive abilities. Although they currently had no effective strategy to face the Trisolarans, if the plan succeeded, future generations of humanity might be able to break the Sophan's blockade on human science. Furthermore, the two of them were already brain scientists. What they were doing now was simply using the authority of a Wallfacer to continue the work they had always intended to complete. Rey Diaz, also chosen as a Wallfacer, began his plan as well. He showed an intense interest in nuclear bombs. Before the Crisis Era, Venezuela had planned to research nuclear weapons, but the project was forced to a halt due to United Nations sanctions. Seemingly unwilling to give up, Rey Diaz began to use his Wallfacer authority to pursue his nuclear dream. Rey Diaz first visited a nuclear weapons research facility in the United States and spoke with the laboratory director there. The director's name was Alan. He showed Rey Diaz their supercomputer, which could run nuclear bomb simulations. Rey Diaz's purpose for the visit was to have Alan and his team design a nuclear bomb for him, a mega nuke with a yield more than 10 times greater than any existing weapon. Alan was not optimistic about the prospects of nuclear weapons in space warfare. Due to the mechanics of how they work, the destructive power of nuclear bombs is limited in space. But Rey Diaz insisted that nuclear bombs were the most powerful weapons humanity currently possessed and the only option they could rely on. Alan began designing the nuclear bomb according to Rey Diaz's requirements, but quickly ran into a problem. The yield Rey Diaz proposed was so immense that it no longer fit the models for existing nuclear weapons. It was closer to stellar combustion. Therefore, Alan asked Rey Diaz to bring in a scientist who specialized in stellar structure. During their conversation, Rey Diaz suddenly saw the rising sun and was struck by an intense fear. He began to vomit, and from that point on, could only live in underground bunkers, hidden from the light of day. As humanity grappled with the Trisolaran crisis, the seeds of escapism began to sprout within the human community. Believing that resistance against the Trisolaran invasion was futile, some argued that the only viable path was to abandon the solar system and migrate into deep space. Given the limitations of current human technology, a mass exodus of the entire population was impossible. Only a select fraction could depart. This issue, who lives and who dies, immediately challenged humanity's most fundamental value, the equal right to survival. The Trisolarans had once feared the potential for future trouble should humanity manage to escape. But the Itto organization remained confident that human exodus was an impossibility. Even though escapism was ultimately doomed, this did not prevent some from engaging in fraud. Shi Qiang's son, Shi Xiaoming, was one such con artist. He leveraged the escapist movement, traveling around to peddle escape funds and accumulate wealth. Under his clever deception, Zhang Yuanchao, a simple retired worker obsessed with ensuring the continuation of his family line, was swindled out of his entire life savings. The UN soon declared escapism illegal. Shi Xiaoming's scheme was exposed, and he was arrested and imprisoned. While incarcerated, he received a visit from his father, Shi Qiang. Shi Qiang was gravely ill by this time, scheduled to enter cryonics and travel to the future upon completion of his final assignment. He confessed to Shi Xiaoming his regret for failing to properly guide him during his childhood. His final instruction to his son was simple: take care of yourself. This farewell meant they would not meet again until the future.
In the initial years of the Crisis Era, Cheng Xin, who had graduated from the Department of Aerospace Engineering, joined the research group for the new generation of Long March rockets. Working there, Cheng Xin quickly recognized the limitations and bottlenecks of traditional chemical propulsion rockets and sought to move beyond that field. At this time, the Planetary Defense Council, PDC, was forming the Planetary Intelligence Agency, PIA. The PIA's membership was intended to be drawn from two main groups: aerospace scientists and spies, or covert agents. As the PIA began recruiting talent globally, Cheng Xin accepted an assignment to work in New York. At the PIA, Cheng Xin met Vadim, the director of the Technical Planning Center, and Thomas Wade, the director of the agency. Once all members were assembled, Wade wasted no time in issuing their first mission. They aimed to launch a probe toward the Trisolaran fleet. Wade's primary motivation for this task was political. Being the first to make contact with the approaching fleet would significantly elevate the PIA's political standing. Launching the probe, however, faced considerable difficulties, primarily concerning velocity. At existing speeds, a probe might take tens of thousands of years simply to leave the solar system. Since the Trisolaran fleet would arrive in roughly 400 years, the probe needed to achieve at least 1% of the speed of light to be useful. Just as the team was concluding that 1% light speed was unattainable, Cheng Xin proposed using nuclear pulse propulsion to drive the probe. The design would consist of the probe body and a light sail. Nuclear devices would be pre-positioned along the probe's trajectory. As the probe flew past, the nuclear devices would detonate, and the radiation pressure from the powerful explosions would drive the light sail. This miracle through brute force would accelerate the probe to 1% light speed. Although the probe could achieve 1% light speed, its mass became the next critical problem. Initial estimates, accounting for necessary instruments and a return antenna, placed the weight at around 1 ton. Subsequent experiments, however, indicated that achieving the desired velocity required the probe's mass to be under 200 kilograms. Such a minuscule payload made effective reconnaissance almost impossible. The United Nations ultimately rejected the plan, arguing that the probe's extremely high speed, coupled with its inability to decelerate, meant it would merely flash past the Trisolaran fleet, yielding no valuable intelligence. As the PIA members reached an impasse, Wade suddenly proposed, "We can send a human." This drastic consideration was based on several strategic points. They knew that contact with aliens held profound significance, and the Trisolarans were no exception. Although the Trisolarans used sophons to monitor human society intimately, they would still be highly interested in acquiring a living human and might even actively search for and intercept the individual. Furthermore, the Trisolarans were known to be deficient in strategic thinking. Sending a living person, even one they knew was a spy, would allow that individual to use their human intelligence to engage in a conflict of wits. Wade's suggestion revitalized the project. Human hibernation technology was already mature and could be utilized to allow the deep-cover spy to spend the long journey asleep. However, Cheng Xin and her colleagues' inspection of the necessary hibernation equipment threw the project into crisis once more. Hibernation required a controlled environment around -50 degrees Celsius. Since space temperature is near absolute zero, constant heating and life support systems were required. The total weight would easily exceed 100 tons. Cheng Xin then had a sudden flash of inspiration. "We don't need to send a living person. We can send a corpse without any life support apparatus." If Trisolaran science was sufficiently advanced, they could receive the body and resurrect the person, achieving the same result as sending a living human. This revised proposal was submitted to the UN. On the very day the proposal was reviewed, the UN announced the Wallfacer project and the 4 Wallfacers. Personnel involved in the staircase program waited outside during the deliberation. It was then that more unfortunate news arrived. NASA's simulations of several in-space nuclear pulse experiments concluded that the payload limit remained too strict. It was impossible to launch even a corpse. They could accommodate half a kilogram of material. Facing this devastating setback, Cheng Xin lost the will to continue. At that moment, Wade, like a ghostly figure, uttered a single chilling sentence: "Send only the brain." The key reason Wade suggested this was simple. All human thought processes occur within the brain. If Trisolaran technology could successfully activate the brain, it could still function as a spy.
Secondly, the brain cells contain the body's complete genetic code, making the subsequent construction of a new body a definite possibility.
The staircase program received approval from the United Nations and was quickly put into effect. The nuclear devices intended for orbital propulsion were launched sequentially into space. However, the selection of the human candidate for the staircase program proved profoundly problematic. First, the candidate, intended to act as an interstellar spy, required not only strategic acumen and personal integrity, but also an indispensable foundation of scientific knowledge and literacy. Second, the candidate had to donate their brain. Given Earth's current technology, the surgical removal of a living brain meant certain death. Thus, the candidate had to be a willing sacrifice. Finally, once the Trisolarans possessed the brain, there was no telling what horrific, inhumane experiments they might conduct. Since the pain centers in the brain would remain functional, the suffering inflicted would be immense. Consequently, few normal individuals would volunteer for such a mission. The PIA thus began lobbying for euthanasia legislation in various nations, hoping to recruit potential volunteers from among the terminally ill. Our own nation subsequently passed this legislation as well. Meanwhile, Thomas Wade was plotting the murder of Vadim. Vadim was indeed an exceptionally qualified candidate, possessing both intelligence capabilities and a scientific background. Vadim was aware of his suitability, but being a normal man with a wife and children, he was unwilling to face certain death. This unwillingness sometimes caused him deep self-reproach. Wade's method involved secretly placing radioactive materials near Vadim, inducing chronic leukemia. One day, the illness caused Vadim to suffer a retinal hemorrhage while driving, leading to a crash where his car plunged into a river, killing him. Tragically, because his brain had been submerged for too long, it was rendered unusable for the mission. Cheng Xin and Vadim maintained a very close relationship. Within the PIA, he had been a mentor to her and a friend. Following Vadim's death, Cheng Xin privately investigated the cause. However, due to the professionalism and precision of Wade's methods, Cheng Xin was unable to uncover any evidence. Tianming was Cheng Xin's classmate. Due to difficult family circumstances, his parents were divorced, he became extremely withdrawn and socially awkward. During college, Cheng Xin was the quintessential central air conditioner figure, a term used to describe someone who is equally warm and friendly to everyone, always ready to exchange a few words with any classmate. In their few, limited interactions, Tianming developed a deep admiration for Cheng Xin. After graduation, Cheng Xin successfully pursued postgraduate studies, while Tianming entered the workforce. Because of his personality, Tianming struggled professionally, falling into a state of destitution. Later, he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. He did not have long to live. Upon learning of his fatal illness, Tianming tried to find Cheng Xin, but by then she had already joined the Planetary Initialization Agency, or PIA, and was abroad. His attempt was fruitless. Tianming's grave illness became a significant financial burden on his family, coinciding with the passage of the Euthanasia Act. His older sister subsequently instructed Tianming's attending physician, hoping he would accept euthanasia and end his life. It was at this critical moment that Hu Wen, a former classmate, located Tianming and presented him with a substantial sum of money. It turned out that during a college outing, Tianming had mashed weeds into a bottle of mineral water, creating an alternative beverage. Hu Wen had later used this unique idea to start a successful business, earning a fortune.
he now offered a portion of those earnings as repayment to Yun Tianming. After receiving the money, Yun Tianming first consulted an oncologist, only to be told his condition was incurable. Given his sister's cold attitude, Yun Tianming ultimately decided not to leave the money to his family. During this period, the United Nations launched the Stellar Heritage Program, or the STARS program. In reality, this was a thinly veiled governmental scheme designed to fleece the public, a classic cutting the leaks operation intended to raise emergency funding. The program involved auctioning off the ownership rights of nearby stars to individuals. The plan was largely meaningless at the time. First, human spacecraft speeds were nowhere near sufficient to reach these stars. Second, with humanity facing imminent extinction due to the Trisolaran invasion, why worry about the Sea of Stars? Finally, even if humans could travel to these stars, such an action would be deemed escapism and thus illegal. But Yun Tianming didn't care. He was a dying man, and money held no meaning for him. He used the entire sum to purchase a star, designated DX3906, and gifted it to Cheng Xin. Cheng Xin was deeply moved upon receiving the star, but because the gift was delivered anonymously, she had no idea who had prepared it for her. Having presented the star to Cheng Xin, completing the most important task remaining in her heart, Yun Tianming accepted euthanasia.
While working in the United States, Cheng Xin encountered a former classmate who brought up Yun Tianming's condition. Cheng Xin reasoned that since Yun Tianming was terminally ill, he would be an ideal candidate for the Staircase program. She recommended Yun Tianming to the Planetary Initialization Agency, PIA, and approval was swift. Cheng Xin had planned to return to China to convince Yun Tianming to join the mission and accept euthanasia. However, upon arrival, she discovered Yun Tianming had already made his own choice. Cheng Xin burst into the hospital and managed to halt the procedure in the nick of time. When Cheng Xin finally explained her intentions, Yun Tianming laughed hysterically, immediately grasping the terrifying consequences of participation. But moved by Cheng Xin's profound seriousness, he ultimately agreed to join the program. During his final days, Yun Tianming underwent intensive training for the Staircase program. In this period, Cheng Xin experienced a sudden realization. She began to deeply regret her recommendation, fearing that she had condemned Yun Tianming to a living hell. Cheng Xin sought out Thomas Wade, hoping he would remove Yun Tianming from the list of candidates, but her request was flatly refused. Subsequently, all candidates participated in a swearing-in ceremony. While the majority pledged absolute allegiance to Earth, Yun Tianming declared that he would not necessarily exert himself for humanity. He would wait until he encountered the Trisolaran civilization before deciding which side to assist. This statement arguably revealed his deeply isolated personality, detached from the concerns of human society. Nevertheless, the selection committee reasoned that his neutrality might serve to confuse the Trisolarans, and given his other suitable qualifications for the Staircase program, Yun Tianming ultimately emerged as the final chosen candidate. Later, Yun Tianming's condition deteriorated rapidly, and he was transferred to the hospital for the mandatory brain resection surgery. It was then that Wade finally revealed the truth to Cheng Xin. The star she owned was a gift from Yun Tianming. Overwhelmed by agonizing regret, Cheng Xin raced to the hospital hoping to stop the procedure, but by the time she arrived, the brain resection was complete. The lead surgeon attempted to comfort Cheng Xin, suggesting that the Trisolarans might reconstruct his body. This possibility ignited a fragile hope in Cheng Xin. Determined that the revived Yun Tianming should taste the food of Earth, she fought and secured permission to send a small packet of Earth crop seeds along with him. The Staircase program was officially executed, yet an accident occurred mid-flight. The probe carrying Yun Tianming's brain ultimately drifted off course.
disappearing into the vast emptiness of space. The staircase program required a dedicated liaison to report the mission details to future generations of humanity. Cheng Xin, due to her intimate knowledge of Yun Tianming, was the obvious choice. In reality, with the probe having gone astray, there was no longer any practical need for Cheng Xin to undergo hibernation. However, driven by profound guilt toward Yun Tianming and a self-punishing impulse, Cheng Xin chose to accept the mission regardless. Here we summarize the three main protagonists involved in this story arc. Cheng Xin falls into the category of the naive idealist. Her involvement in the struggle against Trisolaran is driven primarily by an intrinsic sense of morality and personal values. She rarely dwells on the potential for victory or defeat. Operating under this worldview, she knew that sending a brain to Trisolaran might lead to a terrifying fate, yet she believed it was the duty of a person dedicated to the Earth, especially someone with no hope of survival, and perhaps even an opportunity for rebirth if captured by the Trisolarians. She consistently holds humanity to an impossibly high standard, expecting everyone to possess the virtues of kindness and self-sacrifice. She thus assumed Yun Tianming would share this viewpoint. Consequently, Cheng Xin initially recommended Yun Tianming without any psychological burden. However, following the death of Vadim, she began to recognize the inherent cruelty of the staircase program and started to regret her recommendation. When she learned that the stars were a gift from Yun Tianming, her regret curdled into crushing guilt and a profound need for self-punishment. This state of mind became the driving force behind her subsequent actions, including entering cryosleep and running for the swordholder position. It is crucial to remember that entering cryosleep and stepping into the future was itself a cruel choice, signifying a painful separation from parents and loved ones, and leading her into a future that, under the threat of the Trisolarian invasion, felt like an apocalypse. In short, all of Cheng Xin's later actions were attempts to alleviate her immense culpability through acts of self-flagellation. Due to his formative experiences, Yun Tianming is emotionally deprived and acutely sensitive. This sensitivity was immediately evident when Cheng Xin presented him with the plan. He instantly recognized the danger and suspected that Cheng Xin might be exploiting him. Yun Tianming's first instinct is always to see the darker side of human nature. Yet, precisely because of his emotional deprivation, when he saw Cheng Xin's solemn attitude, he recalled that she was the only person who had ever shown him genuine care. Therefore, for Cheng Xin, and for the sake of that single memory of kindness, he chose to join the plan. If we were to generalize Yun Tianming's attitude toward people, he likely holds a deeply pessimistic view of human society, but Cheng Xin remains his sole attachment. He may not be willing to defend humanity, but he is willing to safeguard Cheng Xin. His experiences in the Trisolarian world are never fully described, but it is highly probable that he was instrumental in the Trisolarian counterattack, an action that reflects his alienation from human society. Later, when he leaked intelligence to Earth, it was arguably not intended to save humanity, but rather to protect Cheng Xin. Wade's personality can be summarized by Vadim's own description. He is a domineering sadist who derives pleasure from the mental anguish and suppression of others. This trait explains why he deliberately delayed revealing the identity of the person who bought the stars for Cheng Xin. While Wade possesses an aggressive, ruthless, and somewhat warped psychological profile, he acts as a ferocious combatant in the overall defense plan, fighting and advancing by any means necessary. This uncompromising, survival-focused drive is paradoxically the very quality a civilization requires to survive.
Dr. Ringer was the director of the Hubble 2 project. Due to the Trisolaran crisis, the Hubble telescope, originally intended for astronomical observation, had been requisitioned by the military. Furthermore, the military dispatched General Feroz, an emissary with virtually zero knowledge of astronomy, to join the project team. These actions deeply displeased Dr. Ringer, who had always been dedicated to utilizing the Hubble for pure astronomical science. After the Hubble 2 telescope was launched and underwent its initial calibration, General Feroz insisted that Dr. Ringer point the instrument toward the Trisolaran system for its first observation. Dr. Ringer argued that this was completely meaningless, as the telescope lacked the necessary resolution to see anything substantial, and arbitrarily changing the telescope's orientation would waste precious maneuvering fuel. General Feroz, however, had leverage over Dr. Ringer. It turned out that Ringer and two other researchers, in an attempt to impress their girlfriends, had scandalously used the Hubble telescope to take high-resolution glamour portraits. With no recourse, Dr. Ringer was forced to comply with the general's demand. The telescope was aimed at the Trisolaran system. The resulting images, astonishingly, captured over 1,000 brush-like streaks. Scientists immediately analyzed the data, definitively concluding that these were shock traces generated by the Trisolaran fleet passing through interstellar dust at incredibly high velocities, speeds that reached 100 times the third cosmic velocity. This discovery not only solidified the stark reality of the Trisolaran invasion, but also extinguished humanity's last remaining illusions. This is a fascinating section of the narrative, highlighting the ethical compromises and psychological toll inherent in the Wallfacer project. 5 years had passed from the commencement of the Wallfacer project. During this period, the Wallfacers had been elevated to the status of saviors, fueled by humanity's desperate expectations. It was at this critical juncture that Taylor's Wallbreaker revealed himself. Taylor's Wallbreaker quickly exposed the true objective of the Wallfacers' plan, the Quantum Ghost Army. As we have discussed, when entities like humans, beings that possess self-awareness and the capacity for self-observation, are struck by the ball lightning weapon, they are briefly rendered into a quantum spectral state. This state is theoretically immortal. Taylor intended to exploit this, forming an assault team that would be intentionally targeted by the ball lightning weapon just before engaging the Trisolarans, transforming them all into quantum ghosts to fight the enemy. The most critical aspect of this plan was the selection of the assault team personnel. Firstly, this was fundamentally a suicide unit, demanding an absolute spirit of sacrifice. Secondly, due to the need for absolute secrecy, these soldiers would be killed without their knowledge. There would be no time for ideological or political indoctrination. Under these circumstances, ensuring that these individuals would still adhere to their mission and not betray the cause of humanity was tremendously difficult. This was precisely why Taylor had been searching worldwide for military units possessing an unwavering spirit of sacrifice. However, the Wallbreaker exposed the entire scheme, posting it publicly for online discussion. Because the plan fundamentally violated human ethics and values, it provoked intense societal debate. The Planetary Defense Council, PDD, immediately convened a Wallfacer project meeting to interrogate Taylor, who subsequently admitted the truth of the plan. Despite the fact that Taylor's actions were clearly anti-human, a fact he conceded, his Wallfacer status was not revoked, as his behavior might still be a calculated attempt to deceive the Trisolaran world. With his plan exposed and no remaining means to reverse the situation,
Yet unable to relinquish the inescapable burden of the Wallfacer identity, Taylor suffered a complete mental collapse. He sought out Luo Ji, hoping for aid and comfort from his fellow Wallfacer. Luo Ji, however, merely offered him the customary Wallfacer smile, implying that Taylor was still performing his duty. This final psychological pillar crumbled, and Taylor chose to commit suicide. Taylor's act of suicide served as the ultimate, chilling confirmation of the genuine, horrific nature of his exposed plan. To briefly evaluate Taylor's plan, among the 4 Wallfacers, Taylor was essentially a placeholder. His strategy had zero impact on the future conflict. The narrative of Taylor exists primarily to demonstrate to the reader the brutal, dehumanizing logic inherent in the Wallfacer project, a psychological mechanism capable of driving a man to his death. Furthermore, Taylor's plan suffered from a fundamental flaw in its premise. It was impossible to confirm the extent to which the Ghost Army could interfere with the physical world. Based on the descriptions of the ball lightning phenomenon, this interference is extremely limited, perhaps only allowing residual information to persist. Lin Yun, benefiting from a kind of narrative privilege, was able to leave behind a poignant memory. Expecting a ghost army to actively participate in warfare and massively intervene in our reality is fundamentally unrealistic. Taylor's disastrous failure placed the Wallfacer project under immense scrutiny and pressure. A plan that had demanded such enormous resources had proven utterly futile. Worse, it had cultivated an anti-human Wallfacer and strategy. This outcome was simply unacceptable to a significant portion of the global population. While Taylor's project collapsed, the remaining 2 Wallfacers were also encountering severe limitations. Hines, intending to enhance human intelligence, required real-time scanning and analytical processing of the human brain structure. Rey Diaz, having completed the conceptual design for his super-large hydrogen bomb model, required massive computational power to calculate its effects. Both endeavors, however, were paralyzed by a severe computational bottleneck. The sheer volume of data and calculations required exceeded the capability of contemporary computer systems. Hines and Rey Diaz both chose to enter hibernation, awaiting the emergence of necessary technological advances. Given the intense public pressure surrounding the Wallfacer project, allowing the remaining 2 Wallfacers to enter cryosleep, thereby temporarily suspending their project, also served as a necessary political concession and a public accounting.
One night, Luo Ji woke to find Zhuang Yan and their child missing. Searching the room, he found a message written by Zhuang Yan on an unfinished painting. She explained that she and the child were entering hibernation, set to wake 4 centuries later, at the moment of the Trisolaran arrival and the subsequent final war. Luo Ji attempted to contact Kent for help locating his family, but before he could, UN Secretary General Tsai appeared. Luo Ji denounced the act as kidnapping, but Tsai coldly informed him that Zhuang Yan and the child had been put into hibernation to ensure Luo Ji could dedicate himself fully to his work. Luo Ji invoked his Wallfacer authority to demand their return. Tsai rejected the order outright, reminding him that the Wallfacer project granted his power, and therefore she held the ultimate discretion to refuse his demands. Unable to use his authority, Luo Ji demanded to be placed into hibernation himself, to wake only at the time of the final war. Tsai agreed, but delivered a chilling ultimatum. Even if he reunited with his family, they would wake only to witness the flames of the apocalypse and humanity's ultimate demise. She pressed him. You were chosen as a savior, yet you failed to save those dearest to you. How will you bear the sight of your wife and child's disappointed eyes? Cornered and desperate, Luo Ji finally implored Tsai to tell him why he, a man of such meager achievements, had been selected. It was then that Tsai revealed the critical secret.
Luo Ji was the single human being the Trisolaran world had targeted for assassination. Tsai's final instruction was clear. Luo Ji must discover the source of the Trisolaran's unique dread of him. Let us now analyze the maneuver performed by the United Nations. While many speculate that Zhuang Yan was an intelligence agent, the exchange between Luo Ji and Tsai confirms that her history was authentic. She never deceived him. The UN's core strategy was straightforward. They recognized Luo Ji as a threat to the Trisolarans, but were ignorant of the specific reason, thus designating him a Wallfacer. On this foundation, the UN established a three-pronged contingency plan. 1. The optimal outcome: Luo Ji fulfills his mandate and humanity triumphs. 2. The contingent discovery: Luo Ji fails to devise a plan, but the UN, by observing his actions, deduces the source of the Trisolaran's fear and uses that insight to formulate a counter-strategy. 3. The coercive measure: should both Luo Ji and the UN fail to find a solution, the UN would employ appropriate means of coercion and motivation to ensure Luo Ji focused on his task. Zhuang Yan was essentially an instrumental pawn in Contingency Plan 3. When Luo Ji outlined the criteria for his ideal woman, the UN surreptitiously added a crucial requirement: the candidate must possess a delicate vulnerability capable of triggering Luo Ji's innate protective drive. Zhuang Yan's character reflects a simple, genuine desire for humanity's survival, coupled with profound sorrow over the impending destruction. This emotion fueled Luo Ji's desperate need to guarantee her a happy life. At the critical juncture, the UN leveraged this emotional bond to force his compliance. This operation successfully snared Luo Ji, proving to be the definitive turning point in the Wallfacer project.
Zhuang Yan's abrupt departure finally galvanized Luo Ji's resolve. Following a crucial revelation, he keenly sensed that the entire situation was tied to his previous conversation with Ye Wenjie. He meticulously replayed their exchange, wandering alone in the freezing snow, even venturing out onto the frozen surface of a lake. In the split second when the ice collapsed, threatening his life, Luo Ji finally grasped the dark forest theory. This theory led to a terrifying corollary. If the coordinates of a star system were broadcast into the cosmos, that system would inevitably be destroyed by a higher civilization. Struggling out of the icy water, Luo Ji immediately found Kant and demanded that a Wallfacer project hearing be organized at once. To ensure his absolute safety, Luo Ji insisted on participating via video conference. Meanwhile, the Earth Trisolarian Organization, Itto, received a message from the Trisolarians, instructing them to kill Luo Ji immediately, regardless of the means. In exchange, the Trisolarians promised to transmit advanced technology to the Itto. Luo Ji left his secluded Eden and returned to a secure underground bunker in the Beijing suburbs. Zheng Sheng, Xi Cheng's successor, was assigned to manage Luo Ji's security. Upon entering the bunker, Luo Ji immediately summoned astronomer Dr. Lin Ge. He instructed Lin Ge to draw a star map containing the coordinates of a specific star located 50 light-years from the Sun. At the Wallfacer hearing, Luo Ji demanded that the Sun's power amplification function be utilized to broadcast these coordinates across the universe. Luo Ji declared that this was a spell capable of inflicting devastating destruction upon the target star system. He stressed that this launch was merely an experiment. A successful outcome would pave the way for true strategic action. Simultaneously, the Itto's assassination attempt was underway. They had used genetic technology to develop a specialized influenza virus. The virus had low lethality for ordinary people, but was specifically tailored to be fatal to Luo Ji. The virus was spread unnoticed around Luo Ji's hiding place and was later transmitted to him by Kant. However, the plan was ultimately too late. By the time Luo Ji fell ill, The hearing had concluded and the spell had been cast. Suffering from multi-organ failure due to the infection, Luo Ji had no choice but to enter cryogenic hibernation for future medical treatment. The Trisolaran fleet detected the launch of the spell and immediately responded by dispatching 10 probes toward Earth. These probes were designed to arrive in the solar system ahead of the main fleet.
After a meeting, Zhang Behai and Cheng Xin had a private conversation in the conference room. During the preceding meeting, the Space Force had unveiled a map of the solar system. The sheer vastness of the system shocked everyone, simultaneously forcing them to confront the insignificance of humanity. Zhang Behai brought up the subject of defeatism with Cheng Xin. Because technological progress had stagnated in recent years, defeatism was beginning to spread throughout the Space Force and among humanity at large. If no technological breakthroughs were achieved in the future, this mindset would become increasingly severe, leading to a shortage of even qualified political officers. To overcome this difficulty, Zhang Behai proposed the reinforcement for the future plan, putting a select group of politically staunch officers into hibernation, to be awakened when humanity faced a psychological crisis in the future, thereby playing a pivotal role in averting disaster. Cheng Xin expressed his approval of Zhang Behai's foresight and asked him to prepare a formal proposal. However, for various reasons, the proposal was ultimately not approved. In the years following the start of the crisis, humanity poured all its resources into technological development. Progress on controlled nuclear fusion and the space elevator remained slow, but research into aerospace craft had made significant headway. As a member of the Space Force, Zhang Behai was granted an opportunity to travel to space to experience life there. During this flight, he encountered Ding Yi. At this time, fundamental physics research was impossible due to the Sofan blockade. Ding Yi had transitioned his focus to tackling controlled nuclear fusion. Ding Yi was in space on this trip to recover a cosmic particle detector that had been launched previously. During the flight, Ding Yi briefed Zhang Behai on the development status of spacecraft engines. These engines would be powered by nuclear fusion, and the propulsion methods were divided into two main technical pathways: mass driver engines, also known as reaction mass engines, and propellantless engines. The former is similar to a chemical rocket, requiring the fusion energy to accelerate and eject reaction mass, propellant, from the ship, using the resulting reaction force to propel the vessel forward. The latter utilizes the radiation from nuclear fusion to directly propel the ship. Because mass driver ships must carry their own propellant, they are unsuitable for long-distance voyages and pose a huge operational risk in future interstellar warfare. However, at the current stage, because the mass driver engine pathway is technically similar to traditional rocket technology, it is highly favored by the conventional aerospace community.
4 more years elapsed, marking the moment the Trisolaran fleet traversed the second interstellar dust cloud. Under the direction of General Ferraz and Dr. Ling, the Hubble 2 telescope was once again trained on the Trisolaran fleet. This observation revealed 10 additional trajectories, supplementing the 1,000 impact tracks previously detected. This indicated that the Trisolaran fleet had launched 10 probes. Being faster, these probes would reach the solar system approximately 100 to 150 years ahead of the main fleet. This action by the Trisolarans was deeply perplexing. If the objective was reconnaissance of Earth, the Sophons were perfectly adequate for the task, rendering the additional probes seemingly redundant and unnecessary. General Ferraz, however, discerned the underlying significance. The launch date of the probes perfectly coincided with the day Luo Ji had issued his spell, or broadcast. Luo Ji might genuinely hold the key to defeating the Trisolarans. The Trisolarans' decision to launch these probes can be summed up by a common adage:
committing 100% effort for a 1% chance of success. In reality, the fastest these probes could reach Earth was still more than 2 centuries away. By that time, humanity would be closing in on the realization of the dark forest theory, and there was even the possibility that Luo Ji would have been cured of his condition. 2 centuries is a vast span during which anything could occur, potentially rendering the probe launch meaningless. Yet driven by the absolute imperative of survival, the Trisolarans nevertheless expended every effort. After the onset of the Crisis Era, humanity poured all its resources into technological development, but the lives of ordinary citizens became increasingly difficult. Food rationing was reinstated, and food coupons reappeared in people's lives. However, humanity finally began to make some scientific progress. Space elevator technology was the first major breakthrough. The materials researched by Wang Yao were launched into space on a massive scale, and space elevators were constructed one after another, drastically reducing the cost of accessing space. In addition to the space elevator, controlled nuclear fusion technology also achieved a breakthrough. The research group led by Ding Yi successfully cracked the key technical hurdles, meaning energy was no longer a scarce resource for humanity. It was at this moment that Zhang Behai approached Ding Yi, hoping to delay the announcement of the controlled fusion results. He argued that once controlled fusion was viable, the next step would be determining the technical roadmap for spacecraft engines. The debate between propellant-driven spacecraft and reactionless drives remained fierce, with both factions almost equally matched. However, the supporters of the propellant-driven approach included several highly respected aerospace veterans. If the engine technology roadmap were finalized now, the propellant-driven option would likely be adopted. Ding Yi, however, stated that the progress of controlled fusion research had been public and closely monitored by the media and the public. It was impossible to conceal. Faced with this situation, Zhang Behai ultimately decided to take a desperate risk, assassinating those senior aerospace experts. Zhang Beihai's future enhancement plan was eventually approved by his superiors. Before entering hibernation, Zhang Behai proposed that all the members of the Special Task Force undergo a year-long internship and training period in space. Before leaving for space, Zhang Behai located a meteorite collector and used a large sum of money to purchase 3 iron meteorites. Zhang Behai then secretly used his unit's lathe to craft these 3 iron meteorites into special bullets, which he took with him into space. 3 months into Zhang Beihai's space internship, an opportunity arose. The aerospace system was scheduled to hold a meeting, and to compensate for the fact that previous aerospace workers had not had the chance to experience space, the meeting was to be held aboard a space station. After learning the meeting location, Zhang Behai staked out a position 5 kilometers away. After the meeting concluded, the attendees were scheduled to exit the station for a commemorative group photo in space. As the participants were positioning themselves for the photo, Zhang Behai used his handgun to fire at the aerospace leaders who supported the propellant-driven spacecraft. In the vacuum of space, the bullets struck their targets without any resistance. Because Zhang Beihai's ammunition was made from meteorite material, those present assumed the incident was a tragic accident involving a meteor shower, and the idea of deliberate murder never occurred to them. The deaths of the senior aerospace leaders caused the propellant-driven spacecraft plan to lose support. The Itto witnessed the attack through the sophons. They considered exposing Zhang Behai, but due to their previous excessive attempts at sowing discord, their testimony lacked credibility. Furthermore, the Itto members generally dismissed Zhang Behai as a victory-ism supporter and did not pay him serious attention.
After the assassination, Zhang Behai and the first batch of Special Task Force members bade farewell to Chang Wei-si and entered hibernation to travel to the future. Even at the moment of their separation, Chang Wei-si could not fully grasp Zhang Behai's inner motives. However, he vaguely sensed that Zhang Behai's intentions were not simple. Chang Wei-si left a letter for the future commander, subtly mentioning that Zhang Behai might be problematic, but this warning was ultimately ignored.
Hines and Rey Diaz were awakened after 8 years of hibernation because the supercomputer they had anticipated had finally materialized. When Hines woke up, he met his wife, Keiko Yamasugi, only to discover that she had not hibernated during those 8 years. Keiko reported on the progress of computer technology during the intervening years. Because the Sophons had blocked human technological advancement, new types of computers, including quantum computers, had failed to materialize. Keiko had resorted to sheer brute force to achieve a breakthrough, simulating a single neuron of the human brain with one CPU, eventually constructing a simulated brain using 100 billion CPUs. Here, let us briefly discuss the view of the brain presented in the three-body problem. Hines's research indicated that the human brain, at its deepest level, operates on the quantum plane, giving human thought its inherent uncertainty and unpredictability. Specific human thoughts correspond to specific neural circuits, a series of brain cells that are universal across all humans. We can call these the brain circuits. Hines's goal was to map every human thought to its corresponding brain circuit, thus achieving the full analysis of the brain. The specific operation of Hines's brain analysis plan was straightforward, using equipment similar to magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, combined with high-speed cameras to scan the human brain. During the scan, the subject would be asked questions. When the subject engaged in thought, the neural circuits would generate electrical currents, which would be recorded. By analyzing the path of the current, the corresponding brain circuit could be identified. During one scanning session, a volunteer experienced an accident. After the scan, he suddenly developed hydrophobia, or fear of water. Hines reviewed the experimental records. The incident occurred when the volunteer was judging the truth value of the statement, "Water is toxic," and the experimental equipment performed a high-power scan. Hines theorized that this high-power scan likely interfered with the subject's neural circuits, ultimately altering his cognition. To test this, Hines personally duplicated the experiment, repeating the exact scenario. The result was that he, too, developed hydrophobia and believed water to be a deadly poison. Only after extensive psychological counseling did Hines return to normal. Through this accident, Hines discovered a powerful byproduct of his brain analysis research. By performing a targeted scan on a specific neural circuit, it was possible to modify that circuit and simultaneously alter human cognition. Hines named this technique the mind imprint. Hines approached General Cheng Wei-si and presented his research on the mind imprint, suggesting its use in the military to instill an unshakable belief in victory. Cheng Wei-si was skeptical, arguing that the belief in victory must be built on scientific rationality, and modifying a person's thoughts via a machine was a terrible scientific idea. Predictably, Hines's proposal was rejected during the Wallfacer project hearing. In the context of human values, freedom of thought is considered as vital as life itself, and people were unwilling to accept having their minds dictated by machines. After much pleading, Hines finally received limited permission to use the mind imprint. The scope of use was strictly defined. The recipient had to be a soldier in the Space Force, and the only permitted belief modification was, in the war against Trisolaran, humanity will prevail. Furthermore, those receiving the mind imprint had to volunteer willingly and be fully informed of the content being modified. Hines established a belief center in New York, serving Space Force soldiers who felt uncertain about the future of victory, but still wished to fulfill their duty. Eventually, a small group of soldiers accepted the mind imprint. Hines felt he could contribute no further to brain science and chose to enter hibernation with his wife, traveling directly to the final war. As Keiko Yamasugi was entering hibernation, she suddenly realized something. She wished to stop it all, but ultimately failed.
Thanks to the advent of supercomputers, the design and manufacture of the gigantic hydrogen bomb proceeded smoothly, and testing was imminent. Due to the massive yield of the bomb, testing had to occur in outer space. Normally, the moon would be considered, but Rey Diaz took a different path, demanding the test be conducted on Mercury, and specifically as an underground experiment. In reality, testing the bomb's yield on Mercury offered little advantage over the moon, yet the cost was exponentially higher. Since the test was already in space, a subterranean experiment seemed unnecessary. Drilling a super deep well on Mercury was prohibitively expensive. Rey Diaz's plan immediately aroused suspicion. To push the Mercury test forward, Rey Diaz lied, claiming the underground explosion would excavate a massive cavern suitable for deploying an inner solar system defense system. This fabrication allowed the plan to be finally approved. Due to Mercury's harsh natural conditions, construction took 3 full years, and the target depth still hadn't been reached. Nevertheless, Rey Diaz insisted on moving ahead with the test. Even under these compromised conditions, the experiment would still blast a significant chunk of Mercury's surface away, creating a deep crater that could, when capped, serve as a defense base. The results of the Mercury test were exactly as he predicted. Massive amounts of rock were ejected, forming a temporary ring around Mercury, with some debris even achieving Mercury's escape velocity. Just as the Mercury test fulfilled Rey Diaz's expectations, he met his wallbreaker. Upon confronting Rey Diaz, the wallbreaker revealed the true purpose of the gigantic nuclear bomb. It was intended to use the explosion's thrust to decelerate Mercury, pushing the planet into the sun. Early in the Crisis Era, Rey Diaz had noted a peculiar astronomical phenomenon. When a planet falls into a star and penetrates its atmosphere, it causes the star's internal matter to erupt outward continuously. Pushing Mercury into the sun would trigger a similar event. Furthermore, this ejected stellar matter would cause the deceleration of the other planets, ultimately leading to all of them spiraling into the sun. This would transform the solar system into a hell even more terrifying than the Trisolaran system. This was, in essence, a mutual destruction plan. Once the gigantic hydrogen bomb was deployed, Rey Diaz intended to use this ultimate threat to force the Trisolarans to negotiate. Seeing his plan exposed, Rey Diaz furiously attempted to kill the wallbreaker, but was restrained by security. Given that Rey Diaz's scheme risked the extinction of all humanity, potentially stripping every human being of their right to existence, representatives from the US and UK immediately demanded, during the subsequent hearing, that his Wallfacer status be revoked and that he be brought to trial. As representatives from various nations aggressively attacked him, Rey Diaz displayed the cradle system he held in his hand. This system constantly monitored his physiological indicators and broadcast a signal. Should Rey Diaz suffer any harm, the signal would cease transmission. Rey Diaz complied that a gigantic nuclear bomb was deployed in New York City, set to detonate the moment the signal stopped. Using this leverage, he blackmailed the UN to drop the charges and allow him to return to Venezuela. Considering the risks involved, the UN ultimately agreed to his demands, and F. Galanin escorted him home. Only upon arriving in Venezuela did Galanin discover that Rey Diaz's cradle system was a hoax.
Galanin could only sigh in dismay that the Wallfacer's profound intellect had ultimately been wasted on deceiving his own people. Rey Diaz did not escape his fate back home. His insane, potentially species-ending actions provoked the outrage of his own citizens, and he was ultimately stoned to death by the furious populace. Let us review Rey Diaz's plan. He cleverly used his persona as a fanatical proponent of nuclear weaponry to divert attention towards the devices themselves. His true plan was to use mutual destruction as a bargaining chip for negotiation, making the Mercury test merely his necessary phase objective. Strategically, this approach closely resembled the later concept of deterrence. This chain of interconnected actions demonstrated a very high level of planning. According to the Wallbreaker, even if humanity dedicated all of its resources to building nuclear bombs, it would still be impossible to decelerate Mercury enough. This claim is questionable, however, as the Itto consistently underestimated the advancement of human technology. Judging by the later human space fleet, the mass production of the required nuclear arsenal was certainly feasible. Naturally, the plan carried immense uncertainty. Whether Mercury could truly be decelerated and whether that deceleration would cause stellar matter to erupt outward were phenomena that could not be tested beforehand. This uncertainty would significantly reduce the plan's deterrent effect on the Trisolarans. Furthermore, later events show that humanity, acting as a collective, is fundamentally incapable of establishing effective deterrence.
With the death of Rey Diaz, the Wallfacer project came to an end. Soon after, the devastating blowback from humanity's reckless militarization began to manifest. The frantic development of industry and military technology led to severe environmental damage, massive declines in grain production, and the collapse of the entire social economy. Around crisis year 2035, the world plunged into the Great Ravine. The economy suffered a severe regression, countless ordinary people starved, and the global population was cut by more than half. This era of profound decline lasted a full 50 years. The painful experience of the Great Ravine forced humanity to fundamentally reevaluate the interstellar war. After all, the worst outcome of the Trisolaran invasion was extinction. Yet, by choosing resistance, they had killed half their own population before the enemy even arrived. People refocused on immediate survival and temporarily suspended anti-Trisolaran preparations. The world entered a recovery period lasting about 20 years, during which various nations experienced Enlightenment movements, and human living standards gradually began to rebound. After another 30 years, a revitalized humanity once again confronted the Trisolaran crisis. This time, however, military development proceeded with moderation and restraint. Aided by the philosophical shift brought about by the Enlightenment movements, technological progress was remarkably smooth, and many past obstacles were overcome in quick succession. During this era, the fleet forces also achieved independence, becoming nation-like entities forming the Fleet International. Their primary territory and operational sphere were in space, and they participated in the UN as a sovereign state. Internally, the remnants of the Itto organization were completely eradicated around crisis year 100. By crisis year 208, humanity possessed an extremely formidable space force. Fleet speeds could reach 10% of the speed of light, and their weaponry could easily devastate a planetary surface. Humanity's mastery of technology was complete, and daily life was permeated with a sense of science fiction. Among the core characters, Chang Wisi, Wu Ye, Kant, Ringer, and Philo died in succession. After her term concluded, Tsai initiated the Human Memorial Project, which involved launching unmanned spacecraft carrying comprehensive human data into deep space, intending to leave a trace of humanity in the universe even after extinction.
However, this action was deemed detrimental to morale, labeled as fugitivism, and officially halted. Wang Miao continued his research into nanomaterials and passed away in his 90s. Ding Yi, after the breakthrough in controlled nuclear fusion, persisted in his fundamental physics research, though without any further results. Feeling despair, he chose cryosleep at the age of 70 to witness the future and the super technology of the Trisolarans, and was later awakened around crisis year 200, 2207, and resumed his work as a physics professor at a university. Shi Xiaoming was released from prison in crisis year 19. He subsequently founded the Gaoshen Company, specializing in the funeral industry, and amassed a great fortune. Upon seeing the first signs of the Great Ravine, Shi Xiaoming entered cryosleep, specifically hoping to see Xixiang again. Due to the unprecedented development of human capabilities, the Wallfacer project, initiated 2 centuries prior, was deemed obsolete. Consequently, the fleet proposed a motion to terminate the Wallfacer project and revoke the Wallfacers' rights. Luo Ji, Bill Hines, and Kiko Yamasugi were subsequently awakened. Upon awakening, Luo Ji found himself in a profoundly futuristic world. Food could be synthesized, power was inexhaustible, and people lived primarily underground, traveling via personal aerial vehicles. Through the introductions of those around him, Luo Ji quickly grasped the progress and development humanity had achieved over the years. He also learned that humanity was currently preparing for peace negotiations with the Trisolarans. The Wallfacer project, meanwhile, had become a forgotten footnote in history. Luo Ji met Jonathan, a special commissioner from the fleet. Under Jonathan's guidance, Luo Ji attended the final hearing regarding the Wallfacer project. During the video conference, Luo Ji saw Hines and Kiko Yamasugi. Luo Ji assumed Hines's plan had succeeded, but Hines explained that his research into mental acuity enhancement had also run into the Sofon blockade and eventually fizzled out. During the meeting, the fleet and the United Nations thoroughly denounced all the Wallfacers before formally declaring the Wallfacer project entirely terminated.
Immediately after the meeting concluded, Keiko Yamasugi suddenly announced to everyone that she was a member of the Itto and the wallbreaker for Bill Hines. She then detailed Hines's true plan. Hines had always been an advocate of escapism. He had long realized the vast disparity between humanity and the Trisolarans, concluding that direct confrontation was utterly impossible. Furthermore, as a neuroscientist, he knew clearly that any process to enhance human intelligence involving fundamental quantum levels would be blocked by the Sophons, making success unattainable. The thought engraving technology was Hines's true objective, not merely a byproduct of his research. Ostensibly, Hines engraved the volunteers with the unshakable belief that humanity would prevail. In secret, however, he had subtly adjusted the thought engraving program, reversing a crucial positive/negative sign, resulting in all recipients becoming absolute defeatists and escapists. Hines was able to modify the thought engraving program undetected by the Sophons primarily because the program itself was immensely complex and voluminous. Changing 1 or 2 symbols secretly would go unnoticed. It was like living in an era saturated with surveillance cameras. Yet, when a murder occurs, the police still have to review countless hours of footage, and it's easy to miss a crucial detail. According to the information Keiko Yamasugi received directly from the Sophons, Hines had secretly manufactured 4 thought engraving devices and delivered them all to the engravers. If used alternately, the engravers could potentially sustain their faction indefinitely, ready to execute the escapist plan the moment the opportunity arose. Hines confessed his plan, acknowledging that he had also used the thought engraving on himself, forcing himself to believe that everything he did as a Wallfacer was righteous and correct. Now, faced with humanity's burgeoning power and the imminent reality of victory, he was suffering immense agony.
Keiko Yamasugi, having completed her final mission, committed suicide, becoming the very last member of the Itto. Luo Ji finally returned to being an ordinary person. Soon, it was time for his discharge. On that day, he unexpectedly ran into Xicheng. Xicheng had woken up from hibernation 2 months earlier. His illness had been cured, and his original unit had been transferred to the space fleet, meaning, theoretically, he was now an alien. After leaving the hospital, Luo Ji began to familiarize himself with the new era. Most people lived underground, social infrastructure was highly intelligent, and every flat surface could function as a display terminal. Standing in front of an advertisement, a wealth management consultant contacted Luo Ji via a terminal. Because a recognition chip was implanted in everyone's body, they were identified by these terminals wherever they went. Through the conversation, Luo Ji discovered that his assets had continued to appreciate over the past 2 centuries. He was now a wealthy man. While this era appeared advanced, the level of artificial intelligence was not high. Many complex tasks still required human completion. The seemingly infinite energy supply was merely achieved by transmitting energy to various devices via microwaves. From that point on, Luo Ji became the target of assassination attempts. First, he was nearly hit by a driverless flying vehicle. Then, a sewer drain cover suddenly opened beneath him, almost causing him to fall hundreds of meters from the high-rise ground level. Sitting down for a meal, he was attacked by an automated food delivery robot. He finally made it to Xicheng's home, only to be nearly suffocated by Xicheng's own smart sofa. When he finally calmed down and tried to order sleeping pills for a good night's rest, the delivery turned out to be poison. Fortunately, Xicheng was extremely vigilant throughout, saving Luo Ji from the brink of death multiple times. Faced with these bizarre circumstances, Luo Ji and Shang reported the incidents and filed complaints multiple times. Initially, the police did not take them seriously, as the era had seen a long absence of serious violent crimes. However, the relentless string of accidents finally forced the police to recognize the problem, and they dispatched an officer named Guo Zhengming to investigate. Guo Zhengming, himself a hibernator, first expressed his deep respect for Xicheng. He then informed the 2 men that the attacks were the work of the Killer 2.0 virus. In the highly automated future, all functions were performed by machinery. Viruses like Killer 2.0 infiltrated the computer systems, manipulating the machinery to kill specific individuals by recognizing their implanted identification chips. The specific assassination virus used this time was designed by the Itto exclusively for Luo Ji. It had lain dormant in the system for a century, activating only upon his awakening. The fact that a century-old virus could still function and be activated strongly suggested that computer technology had long since stagnated. Finally, Guo Zhengming advised them to move to the surface, where there was a village of hibernators. Since that area lacked the pervasive automated equipment, the virus would have no mechanism to operate, thus allowing them to escape the assassinations. Coincidentally, Xicheng had also managed to contact his son. The group traveled to the surface and settled into New Life Village 5, a community composed entirely of hibernators from various eras, living together happily. The exposure of Hines's plan sent the space fleet into a state of high alert. A Trisolaran probe was on the verge of entering the solar system, and the fleet was poised to intercept it. But the potential existence of the stamped within the fleet's own ranks posed a grave threat. With no way to identify them, anyone could be an object of suspicion. Under these circumstances, only one group of people could be considered truly reliable: the Special Task Force for Future Reinforcement. This task force operated on the principle that those who entered hibernation earliest would be the last to be awakened. During the Great Ravine, these outstanding political commissars had successfully maintained control, ensuring the development and continuity of the Space Force. By the time humanity emerged from that dark era, the pervasive pessimism had dissipated. Consequently, the first detachment of the task force, the one to which Zhang Behai belonged, never had the opportunity to see action. The original plan had been for them to remain in hibernation until the final battle, but in light of the current crisis, the Space Fleet Command decided to awaken them ahead of schedule. Since they had entered hibernation long before the advent of mental seal technology, and this, coupled with the fact that they had been selected for their unwavering loyalty and conviction, made them the most trustworthy contingent available. These officers were dispatched to warships throughout the fleet to serve as executing captains. All critical commands issued to a vessel required their approval. In effect, they held ultimate operational authority. Zhang Behai was assigned to the warship Natural Selection as its executing captain. There, he came face to face with a new generation of Space Force officers. The captain of the Natural Selection, Dongfang Yansu, personally presented Zhang Behai with a pistol. He made it clear that if Zhang Behai were to discover any escapist tendencies in any member of the crew, he was authorized to use the weapon. After assuming his role, Zhang Behai began learning the operational commands and procedures for the new generation of warships under the guidance of Dongfang Yansu. On these vessels, achieving maximum acceleration required entering a state designated Advance 4. However, the G-forces generated in this state were immense, far beyond the limits of human tolerance. To survive, the crew had to first enter what was known as the deep sea state. This procedure involved filling the ship's cabin and the crew's own bodies with a special fluid that could withstand extreme acceleration while still allowing for respiration. Under normal circumstances, the ship's systems would verify that the deep sea state had been activated before engaging Advance 4. This safety protocol, however, could be bypassed by switching the ship to manual override. Regarding the probe rapidly approaching the solar system, the Asian fleet had initially planned to dispatch 2 star-based interceptors to track it. However, because every fleet was vying for the right of first contact with the Trisolaran vessel, intense jockeying for the interception prerogative ensued. To prevent conflict, and coinciding with the renewed emergence of the sealers problem, Fleet International simply ordered all parties to cease independent action and recall all vessels to their bases to await orders. After entering the solar system, the Trisolaran probe suddenly ceased propulsion, relying solely on inertia for free movement. Humanity had been tracking the probe by observing its exhaust plume through telescopes, but with the engine extinguished, they completely lost its trace. The Ring-Pharaohs telescope team was one of the groups tasked with tracking the probe, named after the 2 directors of Hubble 2 from 2 centuries prior. The team maintained the traditional leadership structure of 1 scientist and 1 military officer. The military officer was General Robinson, and the scientist was Dr. Kent. Faced with the baffling situation, Dr. Kent proposed a solution: utilize the gigantic hydrogen bombs left behind by Rey Diaz. They could detonate oil film ore, mined from Neptune, in space, spreading this oily substance to form a thin, artificial space dust cloud. When the Trisolaran probe passed through this dust cloud, it would leave a visible trajectory, allowing the telescopes to observe it. Just as humanity was executing this plan, the Trisolaran probe suddenly reactivated, initiating deceleration, allowing people to once again capture its trajectory via its exhaust plume. While the probe was being tracked, the transfer of command for the Natural Selection was underway at the Jupiter base. Zhang Behai received the operational password and authority for the vessel, sequestering himself in a control room to modify the captain's password. Soon, Dongfang Yansu and the 2 other deputy captains noticed that Zhang Behai's operation time was significantly longer than usual. Just as the others assumed Zhang Behai was merely savoring the power of obtaining captain's authority, he displayed his control interface to them. He had already set the vessel's target to a distant star and simultaneously set the vessel to remote control status. The ship could enter forward 4 at any time. The vessel would rapidly accelerate toward its target, but the immense G-forces would kill everyone aboard. Using this threat as leverage against Dongfang Yansu, he demanded that the entire crew enter the deep sleep state. Considering the safety of everyone on board, Dongfang Yansu had no choice but to agree. The deep-sea fluid gradually filled the cockpit, and Zhang Behai finally shouted the command he had anticipated for 2 centuries: Natural Selection, Forward 4. The reality of the natural selection's defection shocked the space fleet, which immediately dispatched 4 vessels in pursuit. After completing the initial acceleration, Zhang Behai awoke from the deep sleep state and initiated a communication with the fleet commander. He revealed that interstellar escape had always been his objective. His earlier proposals to reinforce the future and to assassinate the old aerospace workers who opposed the Starship plan were merely means to this end. He explained to the fleet commander that the Futurism School had predicted the Great Ravine and the subsequent period of prosperity, but this surface-level prosperity was still based on low-level technology. On paper, the human space force was superior to the Trisolarans, but due to the stagnation of fundamental science, any engagement with the Trisolarans would inevitably be futile, offering no chance of victory. As a soldier, Zhang Behai had a duty to ensure the continuation of human civilization, and thus he chose to flee. Following this conversation, Zhang Behai transferred command of the warship back to Dongfang Yansu, demanding that she ensure no fuel was wasted attempting to decelerate the vessel. Zhang Behai recorded the history of his mental journey over the past 200 years in his notebook, then, exhausted, finally fell asleep. Humanity's unprecedented expansion of military power led everyone to believe the Trisolarans were on the verge of seeking peace negotiations, and that this Trisolaran probe was an emissary sent to open talks. The Ring Pharaoh's telescope simultaneously detected a Trisolaran vessel suddenly accelerating, further fueling this expectation, though in reality, that vessel was en route to capture Tianming. The space fleet decided to mobilize all forces to intercept the probe, specifically to demonstrate strength to the Trisolarans. To solve the problem of who should make first contact, they settled on Ding Yi. As a great scientist who did not belong to any of the 3 major fleets, he was deemed the most impartial choice for the initial approach. Ordinary Earthlings, meanwhile, began celebrating all night, awaiting the live broadcast of the interception operation. They believed this would be the final battle, ushering in an era of lasting peace. Some people even began formulating plans to accept Trisolaran immigrants into the solar system. Initial proposals to accept only the Trisolaran fleet developed into schemes to designate Mars specifically for the Trisolaran civilization and accept subsequent waves of immigrants. They publicized these plans globally, even coming to the residential area where Luo Ji lived. However, since the area was populated mostly by hibernators who remained highly wary of the Trisolarans, the promotional event devolved into a farce and eventually fizzled out. Hines, however, remained submerged in pain. Due to the effects of the mental seal, the sealer's imprint, the appearance of impending human victory caused him continuous mental collapse. To treat him, specialists had to be assigned to fabricate false news of Earth's imminent destruction. Luo Ji and Shi Qiang did not bother with the news. Shi Qiang even had a vague, uneasy feeling that this period of extreme joy might lead to tragedy. The Earth's space fleet dispatched every available vessel to intercept the probe. Earlier monitoring vessels had reported that the entire probe was shaped like a droplet and was completely transparent. Thus, the Trisolaran probe was named the Droplet. Ding Yi arrived aboard the Quantum to prepare for the Droplet investigation. Before the inspection, Ding Yi suggested that the Quantum enter the deep sleep state as a precaution against the unforeseen. However, the fleet commander asserted that the probability of the droplet self-destructing was low, and even if it were an antimatter explosion, the fleet was maintaining a safe distance. Faced with the commander's confidence, Ding Yi countered, stating that he was a man from 2 centuries prior who could still teach physics at a university, demonstrating that in core technology, Earth had made almost no progress in 200 years. Ding Yi's words resonated with the commander, and ultimately, the Quantum and the adjacent battleship, the Bronze Age, were permitted to enter the deep sleep state.
Subsequently, a scientific research vessel named the Mantis captured the droplet, and Ding Yi's team went aboard to examine it. Upon touching the droplet, Ding Yi discovered its surface was extraordinarily smooth. Observing it under a high-power microscope revealed that no matter how much the surface was magnified, no roughness could be detected. Even after striking it with a hammer, the impact point remained perfectly smooth. Ding Yi hypothesized that to achieve such an ideal surface, the droplet's molecules would have to be tightly packed together, a state achievable only through the strong nuclear force. The strong nuclear force theoretically operates only within the atomic nucleus. For the Trisolarans to extend the range of this force to the molecular level was an achievement almost as difficult as shooting an arrow to the moon. This implied the Trisolarans possessed immense scientific, technological power, and that the droplet was likely the most rigid substance in the solar system. Realizing the danger, Ding Yi, with his final breath, screamed, "Run, children, run!" The accompanying military officers immediately recognized the peril and ordered the fleet to disperse. But it was too late. The high temperature generated when the droplet activated its engine instantly vaporized all the reconnaissance team members. Due to intense interference, their final warning signals could not be transmitted. The Earth fleet witnessed the explosion of the Mantis and mistook it for the droplet's self-destruction. They were utterly unprepared for what was to follow. Concealed within the expanding cloud of debris, the droplet accelerated toward the human fleet. Its method of attack was brutally simple: direct kinetic impact. Owing to the relative primitiveness of their computer technology, the fleet's systems failed to distinguish the probe from the countless other pieces of shrapnel. The droplet began to strike the warships in succession. Each impact was a marvel of precision, striking the vessel's fusion reactor and triggering a catastrophic explosion. The resulting shrapnel created a chain reaction of secondary impacts, throwing the entire fleet into disarray. In a matter of minutes, nearly half of the fleet was destroyed. Only then did humanity realize the true nature of the threat: a single, tiny probe from Trisolaris. The fleet then began to fire on the droplet, but humanity exhausted every means of interception at its disposal: high-energy lasers, directed energy weapons, and more. Against a material bound by the strong interaction force, all their weapons were useless. Nothing could inflict even a scratch. The droplet continued its relentless assault. The fleet attempted a desperate retreat through a graveyard of its own making, a chaotic space now filled with wreckage and debris. The chaos led to further tragedies, including collisions between their own ships. Seeing no hope of escape, the crews of 2 warships made a final, desperate gamble. Without entering the protective deep-sea state, they pushed their drives to maximum acceleration. The crew within were instantly crushed into pulp by the overwhelming G-forces, a sacrifice made in the hope of preserving the vessels themselves, a final seed of humanity's spacefaring power. But even this was in vain. They could not outrun the droplet's pursuit. Of the entire combined fleet, only 2 ships, the Quantum and the Bronze Age, managed to escape. They had entered the deep-sea state preemptively and were thus spared. Within half an hour, the battle was over. Humanity's space fleet had been annihilated. The number of casualties exceeded 1 million. In the wake of the fleet's total destruction, human civilization on Earth plunged into unprecedented chaos. The hibernators, having weathered the storms of previous eras, remained more emotionally stable. But for the people of the modern age, it was a complete societal breakdown. Government officials resigned in droves or were paralyzed into inaction by the collapse. The populace polarized into 2 extremes: those who sank into listless despair and those who threw themselves into apocalyptic hedonism. The government was powerless to stop it. An online lottery was organized to select 1 million people for a hypothetical escape, but the results were immediately rejected by the billions who were not chosen. Escapism became a volatile subject. Mobs laid siege to spaceports and the bases of the space elevators. Rumors that escape ships were hidden in the orbital cities led to masses of people aiming laser pointers at the sky, a futile and desperate act of protest. Amidst the anarchy, charlatans and opportunists emerged, styling themselves as saviors. Shi Qiang, ever the pragmatist, was already thinking ahead. He began discussing the future of the hibernators community at the neighborhood committee, planning their relocation to a more remote, defensible location. Hines, on the other hand, returned to a state of calm. The predicament of humanity finally aligned with the conviction that had long resided in his mind. Humanity was doomed to fail. When Zhang Behai awoke from hibernation, he fully expected to be treated as a traitor. Instead, as he entered the largest hull on the warship, he was greeted by the entire assembled crews of the Natural Selection and the 4 other pursuit vessels standing at attention to welcome him. With Earth's space forces utterly destroyed, Zhang Behai, through his foresight, had single-handedly preserved humanity's last flicker of hope in space. The soldiers unanimously acclaimed him as their leader. Zhang Behai addressed the survivors. Though they came from Earth, he told them, they could never go back. They were now a new organization, a new civilization. At the suggestion of Dongfang Yangsu, the survivors resolved to establish Starship Earth. The next day, the first General Assembly of Starship Earth was convened. They first confirmed that their heading would remain unchanged, with a planned arrival at their destination star in 2,000 years. At the same time, they issued a declaration to the United Nations, formally seceding from the civilization of Earth. As the conference turned to discussing the future social structure of Starship Earth, however, Zhang Behai became noticeably indifferent. He felt such matters were premature, things to be determined only after Starship Earth had developed further. He also declined the nomination to become the Supreme Commander. All of this aroused the suspicions of Dongfang Yangsu. Zhang Behai requested only to have his authority as executive officer of the Natural Selection restored. He stated that he wished to take the opportunity to tour and study the ship up close, the ship he had risked everything to obtain 2 centuries ago. Starship Earth sailed toward its destination, but soon faced resource problems. The 2,000-year journey was far too long. Existing resources were completely insufficient to meet their needs. The only possibility was to sacrifice or eliminate some members of Starship Earth. The fleet commanders with stronger strategic vision quickly realized this. They found themselves in an agonizing dilemma. Either everyone would die for resource depletion, or others would have to die so they could obtain the resources. But constrained by Earth's long-standing moral and civilizational values, none were yet willing to raise a hand against their companions. This led to what seemed like psychological problems among many senior officers. Fearing the responsibility of killing others, they began to retreat into avoidance and idleness. Afraid their murderous thoughts might be discovered, they grew mutually defensive and suspicious. Some even clashed over beliefs that colleagues were eavesdropping on their sleep-talking. The ship's psychologists found this bizarre, initially attributing it to homesickness from the long-distance voyage away from Earth. But such problems typically spread from junior officers upward. Gradually, mid- and lower-ranking officers also came to recognize the issue, and all of Starship Earth became shrouded in this terrible choice and mutual suspicion. At this point, Starship Earth even developed something resembling a chain of suspicion. Everyone knew that some had to be killed for the rest to survive. Everyone believed the others might kill them. Everyone believed the others believed they believed the others would kill them. Finally, someone broke. The captain of Ultimate Law couldn't bear it and committed suicide. This captain's suicide effectively announced to everyone that they all understood the current situation and could strike at any moment. At this point, Dongfang Yanshu convened the other 3 vice captains for a meeting.
After analyzing the situation and recognizing the extreme danger, they prepared to lock weapons on the other ships as a precaution. But just as they were about to act, they discovered that Zhang Behai had already moved ahead of them. He had already begun activating weapons, preparing to attack and kill everyone on the other ships. Facing Zhang Behai, who once again bore everything alone, Dongfang Yanshu and the other 3 captains prepared to act with him, to share the sin of murder together. But at that very moment, the interim captain of Ultimate Law launched an attack. In the final moment, Zhang Behai calmly said, "It doesn't matter, it's all the same." Because from this moment of humanity attacking itself, regardless of who emerged victorious, a new value system for Starship civilization would be born: survival and development by any means necessary. This spirit violated old morality, but would allow humanity to survive in the cosmos. Though Zhang Behai acted too late to win, the ultimate victor of this war would inherit his hope and allow human civilization to continue. Ultimate Law's attack killed everyone except those aboard Blue Space. Blue Space, thanks to advanced preparations by Captain Chu Yan, had evacuated all air from the ship and thus wasn't damaged by the infrasonic hydrogen bombs. They counterattacked, destroying Ultimate Law, becoming the final victors of this battle. They collected parts and fuel from all the ships and flew toward the galactic center. At the same time, at the other end of the solar system, the same event occurred. Bronze Age destroyed Quantum. Images of Starship Earth's mutual attacks transmitted back to Earth, causing public uproar. Yet from these attacks, Luo Ji confirmed one thing: the existence of the chain of suspicion. This meant his dark forest hypothesis might be correct. Luo Ji then asked Xiqiang to take him to see the mayor, but the subterranean city was in complete chaos, and Luo Ji gained nothing. Luo Ji believed the Droplet's next target would be him. To avoid harming innocents, he had Xiqiang drive him toward remote areas. Meanwhile, the Droplet was racing toward Earth at high speed. The two arrived at a desert. To avoid implicating Xiqiang, Luo Ji prepared to face the Droplet alone. But Xiqiang casually declared they'd have a chance to meet again. It was no big deal. Ultimately, the Droplet stopped in sun-synchronous orbit, continuously emitting interference signals toward the sun. Only then did Luo Ji suddenly understand. The Droplet's target wasn't him. Even if they killed Luo Ji, others on Earth might still comprehend dark forest theory. But by blockading the sun and preventing humanity from broadcasting Trisolaran' coordinates into the cosmos, they would thoroughly eliminate future troubles. After this false alarm, Luo Ji and Xiqiang returned to the Hibernator's village, only to find it surrounded by people. Everyone looked at Luo Ji as if he were a savior. There was only one reason. The star Luo Ji had cursed with his spell had been destroyed by a mysterious force. This mysterious force had accelerated a small particle to near light speed, giving it enormous mass that directly destroyed the target star. And Luo Ji was very likely the spokesman for this mysterious force. Among the crowd was also Jonathan, who announced to Luo Ji that the Wallfacer project had been restarted, with Luo Ji as the sole Wallfacer. Luo Ji told everyone to disperse. With the sun already blockaded, he too was powerless. Xi Cheng couldn't understand any of this. Luo Ji brought Xi Cheng to the desert and began explaining dark forest theory to him. Dark forest theory holds that the universe contains vast numbers of civilizations. Naturally, many civilizations can develop to very advanced levels, possessing the power to easily destroy a star. Cosmic civilizations expand extremely rapidly, leading to resource scarcity in the universe. So cosmic civilizations are essentially in a state of competition with each other. The distances between stars in the universe are immense. Even for advanced civilizations, it's extremely difficult to observe details between star systems. If a star system has a civilization, observation cannot be used to determine that civilization's specific nature or whether it's hostile. We can't just point at a star in the sky and declare the civilization there is benevolent. At the same time, we must be on guard. For survival, we must assume all aliens are hostile, just as our current science fiction works invariably address topics like alien invasion when mentioning extraterrestrials. Similarly, aliens probably view Earth people the same way. This creates the chain of suspicion, leading to mutual hostility between all civilizations. Finally, technological development follows no predictable pattern and can explode at any moment. Even weak civilizations might suddenly become extraordinarily powerful in an instant. Powerful civilizations might also stumble on their tech trees. Therefore, for civilizations possessing the power to easily destroy stars, the most appropriate method is this. Once they suspect a star system harbors life, simply destroy it with weapons. And once this law is grasped, even civilizations with very poor technical capabilities can send false messages into space. They need only transmit information claiming a certain planet has civilization, and naturally some advanced aliens will destroy them, whether the information is true or false. Even if the message seems highly unreliable, among thousands upon thousands of advanced alien civilizations, as long as one believes it, the target planet will inevitably be destroyed. Luo Ji's plan was to use this principle to negotiate with the Trisolarans. If Earth broadcasts Trisolaris' coordinates into outer space, then the Trisolarans will certainly be destroyed by an advanced civilization. But there's one problem with all this. The Trisolaran system is very close to Earth. Some cautious alien civilizations, upon receiving a message to destroy a system, might also investigate who sent the information. The sender is certainly a civilization with some level of capability, so they might as well eliminate the sender too while they're at it. If Earth's technological level were higher, it could send the message from a spacecraft far from Earth, so Earth itself wouldn't be located. However, Earth can only rely on the sun's power amplification, and Earth is too close to the Trisolaran system. As soon as an advanced civilization traces back, they'll quickly discover the information came from the solar system, so the solar system might also be destroyed. Essentially, this is a mutually assured destruction strategy, similar to Rey Diaz's plan. It will inevitably face human opposition, and humanity as a whole could never agree to such an absurd plan. All Luo Ji can do is use mutual assured destruction as leverage to negotiate with the Trisolarans alone. Since the publication of the Dark Forest theory within it has become widely known. A great many people treat it as the sole explanation for the Fermy Paradox, believing that Dark Forest theory exists in the real universe as well. Of course, what makes Dark Forest theory so compelling is that its internal logic is extremely rigorous. People find it very difficult to falsify. This is precisely the theory's charm within the book. But to claim that the Dark Forest also exists in the real universe and treat it as the only explanation for the Fermi Paradox is quite a stretch. First, the book assumes that life and civilizations are commonplace throughout the universe. In the actual universe, this is probably not the case. The conditions for life's existence should be quite harsh. At least we haven't yet seen civilizations develop on Mars, Venus, or Europa. And the environments of these places are vastly superior to the Trisolaran system. So purely from our observations, the emergence of civilization appears extremely difficult. It's estimated that within 1,000 light-years of Earth, there wouldn't be any planets that have reached Earth's level of civilization. Second, the hypothesis of technological explosion is also hard to sustain. On the contrary, reviewing Earth's civilizations, many civilizations stagnated technologically after developing to a certain point. From Mayan civilization to Chinese civilization, and even in recent decades, our fundamental theories across all humanity have barely been updated. What many civilizations actually encounter should be a technological singularity rather than a technological explosion. Therefore, while Dark Forest theory is logically self-consistent, it's not necessarily the truth of our current universe. Using a theory from a science fiction novel to explain the real universe, or even to exclude other theories, is unnecessary. Ultimately, this is just a fictional premise. Although Luo Ji regained his Wallfacer authority, facing the already blockaded sun, he was actually powerless. He hoped to use his Wallfacer privileges to awaken his wife and child so they could spend their final moments together. But just as 2 centuries before, the UN once again used his child to coerce him. At this point, the UN suggested he could lead Project Cradle. Project Cradle's purpose was to detonate giant hydrogen bombs in oil film deposits, creating vast amounts of artificial interstellar dust. This dust would be used to track the approaching Trisolaran fleet, ultimately a meaningless endeavor. In reality, facing the Trisolaran invasion, humanity was already helpless. But the UN still pushed forward with this project, hoping it would provide final comfort to humanity before extinction. And the mythical aura surrounding Luo Ji made him perfectly suited to lead this plan. Project Cradle lasted a full 3 years. During this time, Luo Ji threw himself completely into the plan, carefully adjusting even technical details like the positions of the nuclear bombs. But to others, Luo Ji's divine power had vanished. People gradually realized that without the ability to cast spells, he was just an ordinary person. He was merely immersing himself in work to escape reality and gain the opportunity to reunite with his wife and daughter. Whatever hope people had once placed in Luo Ji now turned to disappointment. Luo Ji gradually lost trust and power. Disappointed citizens continuously came to Luo Ji's residential complex to harass and abuse him, eventually annoying the other residents beyond endurance. Finally, on a rainy night, Luo Ji was expelled from the complex. Leaving the complex, Luo Ji walked alone through the rain toward his intended destination, the graves of Ye Wenji and Yang Deng. Along the way, Luo Ji endured constant mockery. When he tried to hitch a ride, his identity as a Wallfacer was exposed, and he was thrown out of the car. He walked alone through the cold, rainy night, finally arriving at his destination. 2 centuries had passed, and the cemetery was unrecognizable. But Luo Ji still found Yang Dong and Yang Wenji's gravestones. Beside the tombstones, Luo Ji began digging his own grave. Due to physical exhaustion and a cold from the rain, Luo Ji's condition was extremely poor. He passed out several times, but near dawn, Luo Ji completed his work and began the final showdown with the Trisolaran world. Luo Ji pointed a pistol at his own heart, issuing a threat to the Trisolaran world. He wore a cradle system. If he committed suicide, this system would transmit signals to the hundreds of giant hydrogen bombs deployed throughout the solar system. Once detonated, the giant hydrogen bombs would create interstellar dust. The positions and timing of these bombs had been carefully adjusted by Luo Ji so that the dust they produced would rhythmically block sunlight. External observers of the solar system would see the sun flickering in visible light wavelengths. This flickering would broadcast the coordinates of the Trisolaran system into the universe, ultimately leading to the destruction of both Earth and the Trisolaran system by an advanced civilization. Despite all their scheming, the Trisolarans had finally made a fatal miscalculation. Under Luo Ji's threat, Sofan had no choice but to appear and dialogue with him. Luo Ji demanded that the droplets cease interfering with the sun and that subsequent droplets and the Trisolaran fleet divert away from the solar system. With the dark forest state established, the Trisolarans had no choice but to abandon their plan to invade Earth. At last, Earth people had gained a chance to survive. Luo Ji hoped to free himself from the fate of being a savior, to no longer participate in subsequent negotiations, and to quietly return home to reunite with his wife and child. From this point on, humanity entered the Deterrence Era.